Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Ad Age's Town Hall, Exploring Multicultural Marketing. I'm Janine Poggi, Senior Editor here at Ad Age, and I'm joined by my co-host for today, agency reporter Lindsay Rittenhouse. Hey, Lindsay.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many of you out there, and thank you to all those who submitted questions. We received over 200 questions and comments from those who have registered, and we will try to get to as many of them during the next 2 hours as we can. And feel free to post comments and additional questions on our social channels during the broadcast.
So multicultural marketing has long been considered a box that brands need to check, often resulting in surface-level attempts to diversify casting or simply running commercials on media specifically targeting people of color. With many marketers in recent years favoring a total market approach to advertising, there's been an increasingly heated debate on whether general market agencies can actually and truly market to multicultural audiences. So this morning, we've brought together leaders in multicultural marketing from the brand, agency, tech, and media world. And over the next 2 hours, we'll delve into issues surrounding the so-called total market approach and answer some questions on how to authentically target multicultural audiences.
Yes, and we're going to kick off by first defining multicultural marketing and taking a look at the state of the marketplace. To help answer your questions, we have Jill M. Kelly, Chief Marketing Officer of Group M US, and Kimberly Pate, Executive VP and Chief Marketing Officer of BET Networks.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to be here.
Hi, Jill. Hey, Kim.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to level set, and I think we're going to start from a question from a viewer asking, how do you define multicultural at your company? Does it include only ethnicity, or does it also encompass age, gender, language, physical ability, and sexual preference? And Kim, would you like to kick things off for us?
Sure. So I think, I've had the pleasure of working in various organizations from Procter & Gamble to Coca-Cola. And I think for those organizations, at its most simplest form, I think it started off as a definition of really trying to market to individuals of a specific ethnicity. And so I think it's really been a function of over time, really learning that you have to go a bit deeper. It's beyond ethnicity, even as you think about certain segments, whether it's the, Black community, the Asian community, Hispanic community. But that is at its core, that's what it was about. And I think those who do it incredibly well go much beyond just the color, of your skin to really what are those interest and passion points and causes and concerns that are upmost and important to you as a segment. And so, for us, obviously at BET, the network started, 40 years ago as a sole purpose of providing a platform for Black consumers and fans to just be. And so, I'm in an environment where that's who we are and that's who we serve. It's not only, just for Black consumers, but all those others who also love Black culture as well. We truly try to invite them to participate and be a part of the brand. But, it's a very interesting question that I think, I think we'll start to kind of get into today as part of, our conversation.
Are enough brands and companies doing that, going deeper beyond just ethnicity, or is that just starting really?
I think that's the surface level. I mean, I think, yes, that's the point of entry, but, at the end of the day, we all know that there's more than one way to be Black, and all Black people, we're not a monolith in that way. And so I think if you're only going at the surface level, you're not really driving deep engagement. And regardless of whatever segment you're going after, you have to go much deeper. And I think for us, it is, and you can tell those organizations that do it, that do that. It's very, very clear versus some of the organizations, to your point, that just do at the, try to kind of check the box and do things at the surface level. It feels inauthentic. It doesn't really feel like you're talking to anyone specifically, more or less like inviting them to truly participate in your brand. And so I think there's a lot more to do. And I think you can clearly tell, the handful of companies, quite honestly, that do it well and do it consistently well.
I completely agree with that, Kim. And one of the things I would add to that dialogue is that, yes, visible difference, ethnicity is definitely the entry point in, but we're in an incredible moment, I believe, in in society right now, where there is an extraordinary blending of blending and browning of America. Just think about the population transformation happening right now. The word minority is just really not accurate anymore. There are communities inside of America that are not identified exclusively on ethnic background or association. We have extraordinary blending of people inside under 18 and within the millennial population. And as a result of that shift, as a result of that irreversible shift, what we're witnessing is a different type of multicultural marketing activity. And to Kim's point, you know the ones who do it really, really well. We can cite them. We also know the ones that haven't done it so well and have fumbled. So I think beyond the surface skin level, there is a community identified that is not siloed or exclusive. They're actually multi-dimensional. And that is a trend that is happening in the population transformation in America that is just going to continue to increase.
I absolutely agree with that. I think, for me, it's always been about how do you go from multicultural marketing to a multicultural nation? It's a slight nuance,
Yep.
but it makes all of the difference, because it does speak to exactly the point that Jill was making, that there is this whole notion of the marketplace that has totally shifted. And if you're only talking about, here's my multicultural effort versus the entire landscape has changed, that is the notion of marketing to a multicultural nation. And if you can just make that shift by way of a paradigm shift, I think it starts to get away from the checking the box. So you've got two people in a back room with no budget, really trying to do the heavy lifting as it relates to a significant, portion of population, consumer bases, et cetera. And I think it's just, we've got to kind of change the vernacular in order to change the way that we think about it. And I think, again, really applaud, Ad Age for having this conversation today.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what is the state of multicultural marketing in the industry? I mean, from what I see, there are only about 20 or so brands that truly target Black or Hispanic consumers. Examples like Target, McDonald's, Walmart, Verizon, AT&T. Where is multicultural marketing headed in 2021? Will more brands allocate funding to market specifically to multicultural consumers? Jill, do you want to take this?
Yeah, Jill, I just want to clarify before you go, that was a question from our audience who was calling out those brands. So, they were identifying those.
Okay, thank you for that, Janine. Thank you for that question, Lindsay, and the audience member. The first thing I will say is, if we're not doing multicultural marketing today, we are not marketing for our future or to our future. As I had mentioned before, it's the population transformation in America is demanding a new majority marketing readiness, right? And I have a lot of colleagues, both inside of my direct organization and outside of my direct organization, talking about, well, how do we fight for more funding? And I think that gets to the heart of the audience member question. And my response to that is, the business case is really in the numbers, right? ANA had released a figure, I believe it was about this time last year, that while 52% of individuals under 18, those 5-year-olds, those 4-year-olds, those 17-year-olds are going to grow up and they're going to command the buying power, majority of buying power in the United States. The multicultural millennials is 75 million, is our largest population, is our largest voice in the United States. And yet, while 6 states, at minimum 6 states, are already at the tipping point of new majority readiness in terms of population definition, yet we are still seeing single digits of funding that goes directly into this market. And there is a closing of the delta as related to population relative to investment. We're certainly seeing that delta tightening a bit, accelerated by the Black Lives Movement. Yet I believe there are greater opportunities for across categories beyond the brands that you had just mentioned. And I do want to take a hats off to those marketers who have been quite extraordinary in their multicultural marketing efforts. And when I talk about multicultural marketing, I'm not talking about in isolation of campaign and representation alone. I'm thinking about Target, for example, with their clothing line that they launched 2 years ago and continue to the skin sensitivity clothing line that they launched 2 years ago, and it has been adapted for other underrepresented voices. And there are some extraordinary work, and I don't want to undermine or diminish those voices because they are important. And I think about the extraordinary work from Procter & Gamble. The Talk is probably one of the more memorable ones that I could remember in the last 12 to 18 months. And I think those programs, the forensics of why and the how, is a playbook for other marketers to follow suit. And I think we are going to see increasingly greater and greater emphasis on multicultural marketing as a business mandate, not just because it's a good thing to do, but it's a business mandate.
Let's talk about that business aspect of it. One of the questions we got was, we often hear, I don't have enough budget as it is. What arguments are most effective in helping clients see that multicultural is mainstream marketing, particularly if their target, as you mentioned, are younger millennials and Gen Z?
Well, the first thing I will say is, there's that saying, you make time for the things that are important, right? Swap out time for money. You find money for things that are important. And the argument about finding funds for multicultural marketing, I think we have to really change the optics, right? We have to really change. Meaningful change is an outcome of intentional shift. Intentional shifts come from a direct response to happening what's in society. Intentional shift is looking at your audience, really looking at your audience and understanding the growth patterns for your business. Intentional shifts comes into, what does the future of my business look like? What is the consumer of 2025 in terms of makeup, in terms of influence on product development? We saw that with Fenty Beauty when they launched 40 Shades for Foundation 2 or 3 years ago. I think we really have to look at the multicultural marketplace not as a line item on an Excel sheet that commands a much smaller budget than what was typically called a general market or total budget, and really look at the future of your business. Because I'll tell you something, the multicultural audience is commanding and driving greater growth than non-Hispanic white in the majority of categories today, whether it's home ownership, security, auto, retail. So really think not so much about a line item in terms of audience identification, but what is the future of your business? Because that future of your business is going to be heavily reliant on how well you can build early on a loyal relationship with the consumers of tomorrow who are going to command that buying power by 2045.
Exactly. And I think, Janine, to your first question, it goes back to how are you defining it? And I think for so many organizations, they do define it as a campaign. And we know that that is not the notion of what real multicultural marketing is. And first and foremost, one can't start with a photo. It has to start with data. And so I would say to many, if you're using casting as your multicultural strategy, then you've really, really missed the mark. And often I would say to individuals, in any organization, who here is responsible for multicultural marketing? And you would often see, 3 or 4 people in an auditorium full of people raise their hand. But then you say, well, who in this room is responsible for driving volume and profit? Yes, well, fast forward, that means you're responsible for multicultural marketing, right? And I think if we can get it out of these, kind of these really kind of narrow views of practice around what it means, I think, to Jill's point, if you're just looking at pure consumption of X, right? You say, okay, in general, they represent X percentage of my volume, but what you don't start to realize is the influence and impact that they have on what is deemed, relevant, hot, cool, all of those metrics, right? And so for me, and this is years ago, used to talk about this notion of ROI, and it was this notion of return on influence. And the fact that if you can get this segment of consumers behind your brand, the trajectory and win that they will put behind your brand is well above and beyond any investment that you will ever make. And that comes through, ongoing and consistent, authentic invitation to be a part of the brand. It's not about targeting. You'll never hear me as a marketer talk to targeting. I never say, who are we targeting? That is a term that I think is predatory in nature. I mean, if you think about it, when you're being targeted by someone, you're really in someone's crosshairs, right? Who wants to be in that situation, right? And I think people, when they start talking about, are we going to target the African American community or the, Asian community, what's the real invitation? Like, think about the notion of what does that real invitation look like to participate in this brand in a meaningful way? How are you thinking about the data, those insights to drive innovation, to drive, the whole notion of how your brand or company shows up in the marketplace? Those companies that do that incredibly well, they are definitely far above and beyond any other of the other companies, in this space. It is not a marketing campaign.
And to add to that, and so elegantly said, Kim, because in addition to that, we're in 2020 right now, where the social climate is unprecedented, right? And as a result of that, the expectation from the multicultural consumer relative to the brands actually has heightened considerably.
Yeah.
Right. So 70% of Black millennials say they were more likely to buy from a brand if they talk about race-related issues in how they stand up and show up. Right. 80% of marketers are showcasing non-traditional families, and those are helping their brand reputation in the marketplace. So I think what we're seeing, and it's a welcome signal, is a greater alignment in what consumers are expecting from brands in this contemporary context and how brands are responding to them. And our hope is that continues to be the trend line, and we don't slip back into previous years where it heightens and it dips and it heightens and it dips. I have faith and confidence that we are going to continue to see this kind of trajectory where there's greater alignment of brand responses to consumer expectation.
I agree, Jill. I think that, when we talk about this notion of, this moment in time where we are, it's so above and beyond that. And I think that, to your point, the expectation, not only what are you saying, but what are you doing? And I think our consumers are really demanding robust and sustained action as it relates to this space today. And I think for me, that gives me such a sense of confidence and optimism. And just even some of the conversations that I know we're all having in the sense of, well, what does that really look like? And I think that there was this notion of, you can't be afraid. I mean, consumers are demanding that you have to have a point of view. Gone are the days when you can kind of sit on the fence on some of these issues. They want to know where you stand, and that's how they are choosing their select group of brands that they choose to participate and be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. And now another question kind of related to 2020 from the audience. How do we advocate for increased funds to market to diverse audiences when overall clients are reducing their ad spending due to COVID-19? I don't know if, Kim, you have something.
Yeah, I think it does go back to this notion of the multicultural nation, right? It's not about a one-off campaign. And if you can build, as with any strategy, right? It starts with good insight. And if you great marketers when they do that, because while it may feel like it's a part of a narrative that's focused to one segment, storytelling at its best is when it invites people to come into the conversation at multiple layers and chapters, right? Mm-hmm. And so just because it's a quote unquote multicultural effort does not mean that you won't, connect a broader audience. And I think we have to really figure that out, that it's not that you have to develop this specific strategy or effort and only these people see it. I mean, I think, again, that's not an efficient play, right? When you start talking about effectiveness and efficiency, it really are those, organizations that can really understand that there's some universal truths and beliefs that, at the end of the day, all consumers connect to. And to me, it's the beauty of great marketing and great storytelling that feels like it's coming directly to you, but it also invites others to participate. That's where you're going to get the impact and the amplification and the efficiency of that spend. And, that, in my mind, is a great way to to really try to address, limited funds. And we know that we're all facing that, in these times. But I also think that there is, again, no doubt that there's going to be an increased demand. And so you've got to figure it out. And as a result of that, you've got to have the right people at the table to help you, craft these strategies and these plans. And for me, that's, you got to be able to have a team that can see and sees the opportunity.
And that is something that we will be addressing later on today, talking about who should be at the table and getting those people to the table. Both of you had talked about, making sure that these efforts don't drop off and people forget and move on, at some point. And one of the questions we got and comment is it feels like multicultural marketing goes through a series of cycles, stops and starts. So the question is why that is and how to ensure lasting and sustainable impact. So Kim, do you want to start?
Sure. I think, you've got to go beyond who's in the seat, right? The notion, we've all, at one point or another been advocates for something that we truly believe in. And for me, even coming into, leading the multicultural marketing, department for Coke many years ago, my belief was that I had to build that muscle and capability with everyone in the organization. If it's solely about one person who's in the seat and they're the only champion, then you're going to have these ebbs and flows, right? In the sense that this is kind of her passion project versus this is really about, delivering business objectives. As we think about, the most dynamic, diverse, and competitive marketplace, no brand, whether you sell wine or widgets, can succeed without effectively engaging the multicultural, community. And so for me, again, it goes back to the data of things and how are you really, really kind of championing that story, showing the proof point, showing the results. And to Jill's point, there is, as you think about what great marketing does, it's about seeding and building an emotional connection over time. So if you're not doing it today, someone else is doing it. And so you can't just flip the switch, 3 years from now and say, oh, by the way, multicultural market, I'm now open. Please come, be a part of my brand. It is a consistent and engaging message. And you see these brands that kind of go, Fulbright, and then they stop all of their efforts and their business, kind of responds to that.
I completely agree with that, Kim. And I will also add to that is where I started in the beginning is that the business case isn't an emotional decision. It's not an emotional bench. It is a business case that's built on facts and data. And I'll revisit the sentiment about if you're not doing multicultural marketing today, you are not doing marketing. You're not doing marketing for the future or to your future. It is just an irreversible trend that we are in terms of what's happening specifically in the population transformation of America. And we all have to acknowledge that is the state of our state. It is the state of our consumers, and it is the future of our business.
All right. What advice do you have for marketers who want to engage on issues that matter to multicultural audiences, but are asked by senior leadership to stand down because those topics are perceived to be too political? Frustrating but challenging to overcome. Please share any stories about what's worked. That's another question from the audience. I don't know, Kim, do you want to take that first?
Sure. I think with any business kind of opportunity, right, you have to have a sense of conviction and courage, right? And so I would say this position is no different from any other business decision that you would make, right? And I think it really, again, goes back to the data, goes back to what is important for your consumers. Everything in my mind starts with great data and insights. And so if you know that there is an interest, a cause or concern that is of particular importance to your consumer base, as part of the business of doing business, you have to be able to engage. And I know that there's definitely a delicate dance that you've got to strike there, but I will tell you that there is definitely no greater time than to be courageous. I think great marketers have that, in spades in terms of their courage, because they have the passion and the foresight to really have those difficult conversations. And I think, it all starts with what are your values as an organization, as a company? And if it really is, rooted in this notion of, humanity and integrity and all of those things, then I think you have to have those hard conversations. And I do think that, as with anything that you're trying to get sold in, right, and investment, you've got to really be able to kind of have those, in conversations where you're kind of really informing and building advocacy. So again, I don't, I just don't think about it as such kind of an isolated business situation. It's with any other business situation that you have to kind of manage through in an organization, both large or small.
I feel like we could spend all day talking to both of you about this, but unfortunately we have to wrap up. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Jill.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
So just want to say a quick hi to those of you watching at home. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please keep sending in your questions. We have Lloyd from the Caribbean, Nazneen from India, Tiffany from France, Andre from Texas, George from Florida, Mohammed from Egypt, Elizabeth from New York, and Usman from Pakistan. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Hello. All right. Our next panel is redefining and understanding the new general market. So yeah, in recent years, we've seen many marketers favor a total market approach to advertising, arguing that instead of creating and targeting ads to one group of people, they would make ads to reach everyone. But there's a heated debate over whether this so-called general market approach can truly reach multicultural audiences. So joining us now to discuss this, we have Isaac Mizrahi, co-president and chief operating officer of Alma DDB, Sarah Squires, senior VP of business development at Univision, and then we have Gilbert Davila, CEO of DMI Consulting, co-founder of the ANA's Alliance for Inclusive and Multicultural Marketing.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Our pleasure.
Great to be here.
Thank you for having this forum.
Absolutely. We received a lot of questions centered around total market versus multicultural. Probably no surprise to all of you. But we want to sort of level set with greater recognition that cultural appropriation is a wrong approach, is the concept of a total market approach on its way out. And Sarah, maybe you can start things for us.
You bet. Thanks, Janine, for having me. I hope everybody that's watching is healthy, safe, and hopefully sane. About total market approach, Janine, I have no idea. I have no idea if total market approach is in or out. And part of it is because I really never understood what the heck it meant. And I believe most people were kind of confused by what it meant. But if the spirit of it is about inclusion, I think it's on its way in. I think it's stronger than ever. If it's about understanding the needs of every consumer and speaking to more rather than fewer, I think it's strong. If it's about being inclusive and companies demonstrating that and how they communicate to consumers, I think it's bigger than ever. However, if it's being used to actually minimize audiences that are segmented audiences, that was never the purpose.
Yeah, love to comment on that. I'm going to comment based on the fact that it is our belief that the total market approach over time has been significantly misunderstood and misinterpreted, and clearly have supported efficiencies over effectiveness. We feel that the total market approach in itself has a level of industry bias, because what it asked total marketers was to maybe trade cultural specifics for a level of efficiencies. So at the Alliance for Inclusive and Multicultural Marketing, we went to task, and over the last, close to year and a half, the industry has come together, and we just published a report called Reset, which basically talks about the current demise of total market approach, understanding how misinterpreted and misinformed it has been understood by the marketplace. So unless things course correct, and we're truly talking about how to engage and reach the entirety of your audience in relevant ways, then we feel that even the terminology and the nomenclature is beginning to wean down. My final comment is all of that is a result of understanding the power of culture in our advertising. And because of that, that needs to be infused into our communications. And that's exactly what was left out under the auspices of a total market approach.
Yeah. So this next question, I think, is a pretty heated one between general market agencies and multicultural, but it comes from the audience. Can general market agencies do multicultural marketing, or are multicultural agencies a necessity? Isaac, maybe you can start by answering this one.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for putting together this event. I think the short answer is they can. And I think there's a little bit of a misconception in the question, if I may, that general market agencies and multicultural agencies, they do the same thing. General market agencies should be more diverse and should include more minorities, and we should have this as an objective for the whole industry. But the fact that they are more diverse doesn't make them experts in multicultural marketing, because multicultural marketing is a segment approach. And general market agencies have a one-size-fits-all approach, one message to cater to a more diverse marketplace, but it's still one message trying to hit all the checkbox. And we believe, at least we believe at Alma, that specificity drives authenticity. And that authenticity is what's going to be driving the effectiveness of our messages, the ROI of our messages. So we believe that multicultural market agencies should be considered as other agencies in the portfolio that marketers have. General market agencies are not doing PR, are not doing shopper marketing, are not doing events, are not doing precision marketing. And there's a reason because that happens, because it requires a level of specialization, of focus, of expertise that no matter how diverse you are in your general market agency, you're not going to get as multicultural agencies get.
We actually got a question on the other side of the coin. Are multicultural agencies a relic of the 1960s and 70s era of advertising? How should they evolve for the 2020s? Gilbert, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I do want to kind of maybe combine both and tell you that clearly multicultural agencies today are growing in importance, and I do agree with Isaac's observation that it's often really about segmentation marketing, but are certainly gaining momentum because companies are realizing the importance of embedding culture and being able to be authentic in their efforts. And in order for you to be able to do that, you need the expertise, the experience, and the bandwidth to be able to do it. And what's happening is that so-called general market or broad agencies do not have often that level of expertise. They might have one subject matter expert, they might have one creative on the team, but really do not have the experience and bandwidth that multicultural agencies have. To address that question, I mean, a relic of this, first of all, little history. In the 60s and 70s, there were nothing, the word multicultural agencies didn't exist. It was principally Black agencies that were there. Basically, companies were hiring them so that people, less about marketing and more about a defensive move. And over the years, segment agencies developed, and then they were housed under this terminology called multicultural, only because they didn't really know exactly where to place all the segments. But at the end of the day, today, and particularly after this year's social unrest, you are seeing that many companies are seeing more value than ever in having those subject matter experts, whether they are segment or under umbrella of multicultural, helping them connect in relevant ways.
And just one observation, I think, to complement what my friend Gilbert said, the fact that you hire somebody that's Latino or Latina doesn't make them experts in multicultural marketing. Not every Latino is expert in multicultural marketing. Not every Black executive is expert on Black advertising, Black marketing. And I think this is something that should be told, because there is a perception that by hiring somebody from an ethnic background transforms the agency or the client an expert on that. That expertise requires a lot more just than your ethnicity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this next question kind of jumps off of that too. Is there a danger in arguing that general market agencies aren't capable of effectively marketing to a multicultural audience that can be extrapolated to support a point of view that a Black, Hispanic, Asian agency is then incapable of effectively marketing to a general audience? Then not the very reality that has for so long prevented Black, Hispanic, Asian-owned agencies from getting general market assignments from big clients. Same point of view that once prevented women from working on premier accounts. Gilbert, do you want to take this?
Sure. First of all, I do want to address the gender, because I think the marketplace has made wonderful progress, by the way. The ANA study on diversity, it showed that over 50, closing in on 60% of the industry is female. And that is also, you're also seeing that throughout the upper echelons. So that is great to see that from a gender perspective, the industry is doing phenomenally well. You know, when 50% of the US is considered non-Hispanic white, okay, I think it's incumbent upon any and every agency to be able to be capable of being able to address all the different audiences. And for me, it's less about whether general market can do one or multicultural do the other. It's really incumbent on each agency to be able to put the time, the energy, and the resources to be able to fully capture a total audience. Now, let there be no doubt, multicultural agencies today have that level of expertise because they've been at it, they live it every day, and they have the expertise and bandwidth. And I think it's incumbent on, quite frankly, all agencies. Final comment, you know, there's multicultural marketing, which is what we know is either segmentation marketing, but then there's also marketing to a multicultural nation. And I think we're also moving in both directions, the importance of culture in both. If you're doing segment marketing, you need to infuse a ton of culture. And if you're doing marketing to a multicultural nation, no different.
We have a question, Sarah, about what are the latest changes in multicultural budgets, as it seems so many companies are making them a part of their general market budgets. Have you seen that changing?
Yeah, we have seen that changing. I think that companies saw a decline in their performance when they prioritized the importance of the Hispanic consumer. And, you know, this is not only a business opportunity on the upside, it can greatly affect a company's performance on the downside. There is a negative case here, and we've seen it, you know, time and time again. So what I think is changing is that marketers are now seeing that those that have pulled back and kind of experienced those lousy results are coming back and seeing the benefits of return. I think additionally right now we are seeing another layer, which is the heightened awareness around culture and diversity, where marketers are seeing that they actually have a responsibility, right, to speak to the consumer. When you take a look at lifeline services like healthcare and pharma and finance, you know, we call it a moral imperative that these companies actually have an obligation to share information about their products and services with the Hispanic consumer, just like they do everybody else. So yes, we are seeing a switch in where dollars are being spent.
Okay, great. So we received a few questions regarding reaching Latinx audiences. Do you believe that general market agencies have the in-house cultural expertise to develop authentic campaigns in English for bilingual Latinx audiences? Isaac, do you want to take this?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a little bit the thing that we've been discussing. I would like to use another analogy. So imagine that you have a heart condition, and do you go to your general physician or you go to a cardiologist? If you have a shoulder or neck or ankle problem, do you go to your general physician or you go to the orthopedics? The reality is that even if you go to your general practitioner, he or she may recommend you to go to a specialized doctor. And I think that's not very different from what we do. And if you look at it as a society, we have specialized areas in the field of law, in the field of architecture, in the field of finance. So the fact that we have specialized agencies is not something that it's a bad thing. It complements the general market approach. It doesn't compete with. I think this idea that there is necessarily a competition, it's something that I dispute. We have at Alma an amazing relationship with several agencies on the whole general market, and this is doable. So this idea that there is a conflict, yes, there are some multicultural agencies that can do more general market work. It makes sense. We are based in Florida. There's a lot of agencies in California, Texas. These markets are multicultural to begin with. There is no such thing as general market. And there are some general market agencies hiring some multicultural experts and trying to become more multicultural oriented. But the reality is there is a room for a one-size-fits-all approach, and there is room to complement that with smart segment communication, and that's the beauty of the role of specialized agencies.
We have another question, a comment also. We must move our multicultural efforts towards inclusion. The Hispanic market is more mainstream than ever before. This audience is part of the general market audience, English-speaking Hispanics, and segmenting them will be key. How do you visualize marketers doing this, and how will measurement ROI change? Sarah, if you want to tackle that one.
You bet. Janine, there's a lot you put into that question.
It's from our audience. They are cramming them all in.
Well, I think it's kind of emblematic of how people are confused about what total market is. You know, at the end of the day, it's really about reaching an audience and communicating with that audience. And what research has shown is that broadening the number of channels you use to communicate, just means you speak to more. And as far as the ROI goes, Nielsen has shown that messages in culture and in language have a stronger effect. In fact, in some instances, 2 times the ROI. So that's sort of how I would answer that question for you, Janine.
Yeah, can I just embellish on that? There's the measurement piece is absolutely critical, and at AIM, the organization has developed a tool called SIM, Cultural Insights and Impact Measurement, that measures the impact of culture in advertising as well as in content. And there's a couple of factors that come into play. The first one is data transparency, because we need to be very accurate, which the marketplace is not entirely accurate on how you attribute sales growth to the Latino market, to the Black market, and others. All right, and therefore it gets piled into this mambo jumbo where it's possible to determine. But we're able to actually measure that impact of culture, which does drive awareness, recommend, purchase intent, and sales lift. Only then do you really begin to be able to place energy behind the business opportunity. So keep that in mind in terms of how you are measuring your efforts and how are you properly attributing it to the segment.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I think we only have time for one more question. And this, again, from the audience. With the 2 main ingredients of this long had conversation being general market agencies versus multicultural agencies, isn't there an argument to be made that the real question should be, what does the agency of the future look like? Isaac, do you want to take this one?
Absolutely. I think that, we're going to be talking more about orchestration. If you remove the discussion about multicultural marketing, look at all the disciplines that we have around, what we call general market agency is going to have to become more a lead agency. And we should abandon this idea of a general market agency. Lead agencies are going to be the stewards of brand positioning and overall communication strategy. And they're going to be articulating this orchestration, bringing shopper marketing, bringing PR agencies, bringing precision bottom of the funnel agencies, bringing multicultural experts around. This orchestration is going to be more and more needed in the future as we are approaching an era of mass fragmentation. So I believe that maybe, I don't know if I can put that on a book, I can be a millionaire, but my hint is that the future is going to be more about orchestration of different talents and skill sets rather than one agency being the general market mainstream agency leading or dictating what others should do.
Great. Well, thank you to Sarah, Gilbert, and Isaac. We very much appreciate you being a part of this, and great conversation. We could keep debating this, I'm sure, and I'm sure we will be. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So thank you to those watching at home. We have a few more shout outs. We have Umir from Indonesia, Hessa from Saudi Arabia, Nasir from Virginia, Murat from Turkey, Christian from Ecuador, Isaiah from New York, Joe from California, and Christian from Ecuador. Thank you so much for tuning in. As we have discussed, from the first part of this program, diverse talent is an incredibly important part of this conversation in one of the ways of reaching multicultural marketing. And it's critical to address the need to ensure that there are diverse voices in the ad ranks. We received dozens of questions regarding how a diverse workforce can improve multicultural marketing. And joining us today to help answer those questions, we have Soon Mi Kim, who's the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer and Executive VP at Omnicom Public Relations Group. And we have Tiffany Edwards, Global Head of D&I at Droga 5. Hey. Hello. Hi. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So it definitely, this area of conversation about hiring a diverse workforce and the importance of that, we received so many questions about that. And it's one of the questions was talking about accessing diverse talent seems to be one of the greatest challenges our industry faces. How would you suggest we could alter this scenario? Sunmi, do you want to start that?
Yeah. Hi, Janine. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be with you all. It's so interesting when I think about the challenges that people often talk about, like, pipeline and, concerns around that. I actually don't think of it as so much a challenge versus an opportunity. And I think part of that also means that we need to think about what are the systems that are in place currently, right? That really set it up in such a way that we are pursuing certain type of talent from certain type of places. And I think it's really more of an issue of broadening, the ways and places that we look for diverse talent. I mean, there's a conversation that many of us have, like, I don't know that it's really that hard. I think it's just more a matter of broadening our lens from what it is currently.
Yeah, definitely. This question comes from an agency person. So how can we as an agency show our commitment to multicultural marketing when our agency itself is not diverse? Tiffany, maybe you can take this one.
Absolutely. So I agree with what Sunmi just said a minute ago. This is not about not being able to find talent. It's about creating space for them to succeed within agencies because we have a very limited definition of what success is. And so I think the two go hand in hand together. You have to create a pipeline and hire diverse talent. And then once they're in-house, you have to give them a seat at the table and a voice. And so, a lot of agencies that are lacking diversity, it's either a retention problem, they're hiring talent and they're not staying, or they're there and they're not being given a seat at the table that has influence on the work that we're putting out in the world. Their stories aren't being valued and seen as, top line for making sure that the creative work going out into the world is inclusive and telling all stories. And so, all agencies can do this if they make sure that they're positioning talent in the right way and working with their people of color in a way where their voices are heard, seen, and valued as much as the rest of the agency.
Yeah. And what is being done to incentivize the hiring, mentorship, and promotion of multicultural talent in mainstream agencies? Maybe Sunmi, you can take this.
Sure. I mean, I would say that this has definitely been expedited in this particular time following the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter social justice movement. Is that I know that not just our own agencies, but across the board, there is a moral imperative as well as a business imperative to ensure that we have diverse talent across the board. And more we're building this into our systems in terms of compensation, in terms of key performance indicators. So I think definitely this is the way that agencies, organizations are definitely looking at this, as how do we integrate this and incentivize through compensation and otherwise into our way of approaching things.
What has to happen next? As you see, agencies talking about this, just to follow up on that, like what are concrete things that, for 2021 that agencies and brands should really be doing to follow through on those types of promises?
Absolutely. I can jump in there. I agree with everything. I think Asumi and I are going to agree on everything we talk about. I think that, in addition to really looking at systems and the way our organizations operate, we also have to be realistic. Clients are now demanding this diversity. This is no longer a nice to have a conversation, where we do a few diversity events or, sponsor something and say we're done. Organizations in 2021 that are not taking this mandate seriously from their clients, making it a priority in-house, and also taking a look at what the next generation of talent coming into their agency is demanding, are going to end up being behind the curve. And so for 2021, the conversation should be not just how do we hire more people and bring them into the agency, but again, what are the systems, policies, processes, practices that we have in place that may be excluding people and making it difficult for them to stay and grow through the ranks of the agency? And also, how are we surrounding the talent that we have existing and making sure that they have space to move through the next levels of the agency, and aren't a part of that very large group of talent that leaves within the 1 to 3 year mark.
So we had another question from the audience. Given the recent gaffes of brands and cultural insensitivity, how can we hold brands accountable to having people of color at the table for not only multicultural marketing decisions, but also for general design and brand decisions? Tiffany, you want to take that as well?
Absolutely. I think we have a consumer base that is more aware and woke than ever. And so even more than us, that population is going to be holding brands accountable. I don't know if you guys saw, but after the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, all the crazy things that went on, this 2020, there was a circulating document started by, consumers that was tracking brands, not only what they were saying, everybody was making sure they were saying the right thing on Twitter, on social media about Black Lives Matter and civil rights, but also they were tracking who worked at the company, how many people of color were in that company, who was sitting on the board seats. So I think the demand for accountability and authenticity in these actions is key. This cannot be reaction to a moment. This has to be a long-term commitment, creating change and systems of equity within the brand and externally as well. And so I think that, brands, agencies, both the same, have to make sure that they are doing this work, again, with people of color having a seat at the driver's seat of the table, to make sure that there is authenticity in these efforts and not just a check the box action.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I totally agree. Again, Tiffany, I'm in agreement here. I think this particular generation, when we talk about Gen Z as an example, is definitely going to hold us accountable. And so whatever we say we've got to do, we've got to close that say-do gap. And so when we think about, organizationally, what accountability needs to be put in place, sure. I mean, it's everything that we've just mentioned, but in addition to that, yes. Our people, the consumers out there are definitely holding all brands and organizations accountable on social media and elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And acts of racism, hate, and violence against Asian Americans have escalated during the pandemic. Sadly, most marketers haven't stepped up to denounce these acts or help the Asian community in fighting the virus bias. That was a comment from an audience member. They asked why. Sumi, maybe you can take this one.
Oh yeah, you know what? Those of us who are in this field, we definitely are familiar with that term, Asian invisibility. And I think it's really easy to kind of overlook so much that is happening to not just those in the Asian community, but elsewhere until it really kind of hits you in the face, which I think is a real miss. That, to someone's earlier point, when we think about data and insights and just being aware of what is going on in the world, it's actually too bad. It's a missed opportunity when people don't use those moments to speak up for audiences that are really, really heavily impacted by what's happening of course, this year, it's interesting. I'll just kind of point to a particular conversation I was listening to when I asked someone, like, okay, this is fantastic of all of the work that you're doing. I'm just curious, what are you doing for Asian businesses at the beginning of the whole COVID crisis and the Chinatowns all across the U.S. that were affected by this? What have you been doing for those organizations? And after a little bit of hemming and hawing, people are like, oh, you know what, we just decided to take a more general market approach. And of course, that made me just kind of pause for a second. Well, what do you mean by that? And it was clear. It's like, well, it was that one was not aware of that and therefore not addressing it. And I think it's a real miss when we're not really recognizing what's going on across different communities.
How can, as an industry, we do better to bring those issues to the forefront, issues that maybe are not getting as much recognition or people are glossing over? How can we do better?
Yeah, I think, I can jump in there as well. I think we have to get out of the scarcity mindset, or what I like to call the oppression Olympics, which is, if, multiple diverse groups are facing discrimination. But, we often lean towards the issues that are the worst or the most pervasive. And so, for example, the diversity conversation recently has become extremely and literally black and white. And I just had an interesting conversation with our Asian American and AAPI community at Droga 5, and they flagged that they were hesitant to bring up some of the issues they were facing because they didn't want to kind of drown out, or dilute the issues that the Black community was facing. And so, a lot of the conversation has to be around inclusivity across the board, and also diverse groups supporting each other as well, and not feeling like we're almost separating people or separating groups and making sure that they're not supporting each other. And so it's letting go of that mindset and making sure that inclusivity really does support all groups. And again, having those voices at the table and allowing those people to raise those issues will mitigate that, because one person can't know everything, but if you have someone from each community representing what's going on, that'll help make sure that you're facing it as an organization.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, if I could just add to that, Tiffany. I mean, I totally agree with you. I think it's so important that across, especially underrepresented groups, that we are supporting one another. And as someone once told me just recently, I guess to remember that a tactic of colonialism is the dividing and conquering. And so I think it's really so important that we all support one another, particularly in these moments of oppression that we're all facing.
We got a question about education, which is interesting, talking about college students. How can we better prepare students who do not experience much diversity in their lives for a career in marketing and ensure they have appropriate exposure to the diversity they will find in, they put in quotes, real world? Tiffany, maybe you want to answer that?
Absolutely. I think, again, we have to realize that this generation, especially Gen Z, is our most diverse generation ever. I think the stat is like 49% of this current generation identify as diverse. And so, it's a combination of, hopefully they're having diverse experiences in their lives, but if they're not, really tapping into the rich, social media, internet kind of experience that are out there. And also, again, making sure that if you're bringing them into your organization, you have enough diversity across the board that they're able to interact with different people, and that the diversity programming and events you're doing are open to all. So it's not just a Black event for the Black employees, an AAPI event for the Asian American and Pacific Islander employees, that everyone is brought to the table around this conversation and made clear that it's in all ships rise together and that everyone plays a role in this. But ultimately, it's just exposure through experience, and by valuing all experiences, again, everyone will be exposed to that.
Do you believe brands will ever set and enforce diversity standards for their teams, agencies, and partners? Sumi, do you want to take this one?
I don't know if I would say, I guess it depends on what you mean by the term standards. I think, to Tiffany's point, it's so important that we have a diverse workforce. I know that I personally, I'm the beneficiary of diverse workforces, and I think it's so critical to our thinking, to our collaboration, the ideas that are brought to the table, and being able to respond in these particular moments with empathy and understanding. So, standards to me, I think, are important in the sense, I try to think a bit about it more as like, this is an imperative for our organization, and therefore we have goals that we are trying to seek. But I think it's so much more than just the number per se. I think that's exactly a start, but it's so much more than that in terms of the inclusive culture, but also opportunities for people's ideas and leadership to thrive. So I think it's so much more than just the numbers themselves.
Could you elaborate on that? Besides like the numbers, what else are the important standards or metrics, or however you want to quantify it, that, you know, brands should be held accountable to?
Yeah, I think for the longest time, and you'll hear folks say like, oh, is this a check the box exercise and that type of thing? And that's certainly something that we want to make sure that we are thinking beyond. Certainly we want to be held accountable. We want KPIs. We want to make sure that we are meeting those specific goals and expectations. However, there is so much more. So when I think about diversity, equity, inclusion, it is not just the representation part of it. While that is really, really important, what is it in terms of the transformation that an organization needs to experience versus the transactional nature? What is it in terms of the culture that is one that where people want to be a part of, where people want to contribute to and lead and be and help support and grow? So I think it's so much more than only the numbers. It's so much about the transformation of the organization as a whole.
Tiffany, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
I absolutely agree with Soon-Mi. I think it is cultural. I think, a big part of it too is ways of working. We have some very specific systems set up in advertising that have also then set up the outcome of the experience of people in the agency. And so, really looking at what we call a 0 to 5, making positive interruptions along the way, so that it's not just, making sure that people of color feel included in the culture, but also, again, that it shows up in the ways we work, in the way people's voices are valued and centered, and really making sure that that is also shown to our clients. But I will add that, from a client perspective, we are seeing more and more clients are now giving very specific requests and goals around diversity, and setting very specific rules for their vendors that they're expecting them to meet. So, it needs to permeate the entire organization and not just be reactive to those requests. But at the same time, it is a reality that the entire industry is going to have to look at, that this is going to be a business mandate and a business imperative again.
And a question for both of you. What do you both hope to see accomplished in 2021?
I personally hope to see this energy that, sprung up in 2020 and all of these, great warriors that came to the table, to sustain that. I think that diversity work is ongoing. It's maintaining your stamina. And it's also, as Glenn Singleton taught me, accepting non-closure, and so there are people at different points of their diversity journey and at different points of their racial journey, but you can't just stop once the wave or the momentum passes or the moment passes. This has to be sustained, a commitment to change, an everyday journey. And people have to accept that there's not just one end goal and then you're done. We have to constantly evolve and change and build together. And so I hope we see the energy and the momentum continue in 2021 and beyond.
Before Soon-Mi, you answer, I think this idea of sustainable is a big one. Any thoughts on what that means, or what are some of the actionable things to make this a sustainable endeavor versus something that people think about in the moment right now, and then something else happens and we forget about it and we move on?
Absolutely. I think, again, it's making that real organizational commitment to this, and then making sure that it's a work stream that everyone in the organization from top to bottom is responsible for together. Again, it's not reactive. It can't just be reactive to a request from a client, or just because it's a moment in our society or our culture that needs reaction. It has to be something that the entire organization is committed to, that is driven from the top, and that is continued to be talked about and pushed continually, not just at flashpoints.
And Soon-Mi, 2021, any hopes for next year?
In some ways, I hope that 2020 will be an abomination and that 2021 will be on to some greener pastures. But I also don't want to lose the lessons of 2020. That whole idea of keep that same energy, I think, is really, really important. And the other thing, too, that I think is important in 2020 is that, I think for the longer term, at least, I think it's important that we recognize the systemic inequality that many folks' eyes were open to in 2020, so that in 2021, we are really working to dismantle, investigate, interrogate those systems, and making some real progress in 2021.
Great. Thank you both so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Next up, we are going to take a look at some best practices for targeting and measuring multicultural audiences and campaigns. We are joined by Andrea Carrasquel, Head of Brand Partnerships at Tumblr, and Vinay Shahani, VP of Integrated Marketing Operations at Toyota Motor North America.
Hello.
Hi, thank you for joining us.
Hey,
Thanks
good
for
morning.
having us. Good morning.
So for this conversation, we're talking a bit about multicultural media owned and operated by people of color, essential to any multicultural strategy. How are brands and agencies focusing on this important but often overlooked segment of media? Vinay, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so just to clarify, you're asking about multicultural owned media outlets?
Correct. Yes, multicultural owned.
Yeah, I think I'd be happy to start. Thank you for having me. At Toyota, the approach that we take is really something that we take seriously around the company. So I'll start with our dealerships. We want to make sure we have diverse representation amongst our dealers and our manufacturing side with respect to suppliers and engineering companies, and even the makeup of the workforce. We take diversity very seriously and multicultural owned businesses very seriously, and we want to make sure that that's part of the business mix. I think the same goes for media, and I would say first and foremost, we first start to make sure that we can reach the right people. So whatever the media outlet is, whatever the media channel is, we want to make sure that we have the ability to reach the consumers that make up the United States. So number one is, do they have the reach and the consumers that we want to be able to target? That's the first consideration. The second consideration would be, do we have the right mix of ownership? And, we rely very closely on our agency, our wonderful agency partners, whether it's Burrell for African American, Conil for Hispanic, Intertrend, which is our Asian agency of record, and then of course working with Saatchi and Zenith Media to really take a comprehensive approach to make sure that we're firing on all cylinders, if that makes sense. I'll pause there.
Absolutely, yeah. And we had several questions that we received on reaching Hispanic consumers. This is one: given the growth of the Hispanic population and the complexity in terms of many countries of origin and language, both Spanish and English being relevant, what is your approach to most effectively reaching and engaging this consumer base? Andrea, do you want to take this one?
Yes, I do. So I think this is the question that we need to be constantly asking ourselves, because as you mentioned, the demographics definitely changing. So we need to be constantly monitoring. And two ways that I think are key to resonating with this audience, first off, is thinking a bit more local. So understanding the regions where the US Hispanic population live, because that's very telling as well with their country of origin. We see in California and in Texas, the country of origin that really resonates and over indexes is Mexican American. So that's completely different demographic and audience when you think of Florida and New York. And part of, thinking locally is also personalizing the content and the media. So apart from just the country of origin, we also need to take a look at age, right? Because age is very telling with the US Hispanic population in terms of their preference of language. So Gen Z tend to be a bit more leaning towards English language content, and some of them may not even speak Spanish. So understanding that insight and creating content that is more appealing to an English language first consumer is definitely key in being able to resonate authentically with this audience. And just like any campaign, we have to test and learn and optimize and refine, because as the question clearly states, definitely an audience that's changing rapidly. So we must also be kind of understanding what's working, what's resonating, and experiment a bit, and always kind of ask ourselves this question and always optimize.
You hit on this a little bit talking about language, but we also got a question: are brands and agencies utilizing different tactics to reach the Spanish speaker versus the bicultural audience? And, obviously there's a huge difference between these two demographics. Andrea, do you want to talk a little bit more about the language aspect?
Yeah, definitely. So language is very key to understanding the U.S. Hispanic consumer. And the big difference between Spanish language and English language comes into also the acculturation. So how immersed they are in American culture. With Spanish language speakers that may not even speak English, they might be a little bit more less acculturated with the U.S. culture. And the other side of the spectrum is English language consumers. So the U.S. Hispanics that are English language first, they might not even speak Spanish, and they may be a lot more acculturated and immersed in the American culture. So it's definitely two different audiences that we have to take a look, and the tactics are completely different. So it's not just about language and changing the creative from English to Spanish or vice versa. It's kind of taking a deeper look and looking at culture, because culture resonates even further than language, and understanding that somebody that prefers Spanish language will have a completely different, culture and lifestyle than somebody that may prefer English language content. So that's another kind of point to take into account. And just like I mentioned in the earlier question, personalizing is definitely key. So being able to kind of hone in on the insights, on the nuances, and being a bit more personal, not just kind of changing the language just for the language sake. It's always going to resonate and be more successful.
This next audience member commented, "We must move our multicultural efforts towards inclusion. The Hispanic market is more mainstream than ever before. This audience is part of the general market audience, English-speaking Hispanics, and segmenting them will be key. How do you visualize marketers doing this, and how will measurement and ROI change?" Vinay, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think Andrea touched on it a little bit, and it starts with the recognition that there's no such thing as a general market anymore. There is a transcultural mainstream that exists, where we have, as Andrea mentioned, different levels of acculturation. You have different cultures that are interplaying with one another, and the boundaries may not be as clear as they once were before. So the implication to a marketer and working closely with the agencies that I mentioned before is we have to be very clear about, how do we want to have a consistent brand view, but we also want to be authentic, and we also want to recognize different cultural nuances and different cultural insights that may exist. So, 7 years ago, we transitioned to an approach that we call Total Toyota, where we really take into consideration this new transcultural mainstream. We work closely with the agencies I mentioned before across, Burrell for African American, Cornell for Hispanic, Intertrend for Asian, and then Saatchi and Zenith, where we have one brief now, whereas years ago it used to be separate briefs that would lead to separate campaigns across each of these multicultural segments. Whereas now it's one brief. We come up with a comprehensive, more of an orchestration of content that is, very, very closely related, so that for those people that decide they want to consume in language, or they want to consume something which is predominantly, Spanish, versus that individual who wants to go into a channel which is more English, they have that choice with the fragmentation of media. But we take that into consideration. And I think a great example that comes to mind recently would be what Toyota worked with Viacom CBS in the MTV Music Awards, the VMAs, just a couple of months ago, where we recognized that there's an opportunity to reach Spanish language people who speak Spanish, people who are of Hispanic descent who want to consume English. We partnered with J Balvin to do a really cool branded integration. And we found that it resonated not only with the Spanish speakers, but also with those who want to consume English. And I think these are the types of efforts that we want to take in order to recognize and visualize this new way of thinking in the marketplace today.
So knowing the importance of targeting multicultural audiences growing, one of the audience members said, "We are also noticing targeting options are becoming more and more limited. For example, the recent removal of multicultural affinity targeting in online channels to prevent misuse. With these new barriers, how do we continue to reach these essential audiences directly, primarily online?" Andrea, do you want to take that?
Yes. So Tumblr has a very strong point of view when it comes to user privacy. We actually pride ourselves in not asking our users too much information. And it's really one of the only social media platforms where you can be truly anonymous. And partly it's because we realize that Gen Z, which makes up the majority of our users and the growth of the Tumblr platform, they're very conscious of what type of data they give out. They definitely learn from their millennial friends. And so it's something that we want to keep and instill within Tumblr. And how we do targeting, noting that it's all based on interests. So Tumblr is a place where people come and explore what they love. So they already kind of raise their hands on things that they're really interested in. And so we connect brands with audiences based on these segments that we created, understanding what audience have opted in as part of their interest. So we can take a deep dive and see for the US Hispanic, for example, which communities are really kind of over-indexing in particular categories, and making sure we can connect the brands through those interests. And some of the interests that come to mind, definitely gaming, music, which is no surprise, and entertainment as well with film. So it's definitely kind of good to look at these key verticals, but then also get a bit more into the subcultures, the subcommunities, and understanding the nuances that are able to hit on the audience effectively. And I started at Tumblr about 4 months ago, and this is a huge passion project of mine. I want to be able to provide a solution because, yes, there is barriers to targeting, and we want to make sure that we're also being very, cognizant of the user information that we ask for our users. So hoping that we can provide a new solution that's a bit more authentic on how we target the audience.
And Vinay, how is Toyota looking at targeting?
Yeah, I think that targeting has come a long way in recent years, just technologically speaking. We have a lot of tools that we use, obviously working really closely, again, not to be sounding like a broken record, but that's why we have the best and brightest agencies that are helping us pilot and try and scale up new technologies to reach people. I think another great tactic that we've used is leveraging influencers that have an inherent following. Obviously, we look to be very authentic, so it's not like we just go and hire someone off the street, but we look for people who has access to a certain multicultural segment that already have an affinity towards Toyota, because I think having someone who's authentically a fan of your brand is a requirement. But I think that influencer strategies, celebrating cultural moments is another really important tactic that we've leveraged in recent years, where, as an example, we have our Toyota USA channel on social media platforms. We also have kept our Toyota Latino channel as well, because we, again, recognize that some people want to consume in language. Some days they want to consume in English. But the cultural moments that we celebrate are sort of, overriding, or I shouldn't say overriding, that would be sort of more overarching is a better word to describe that, where, for example, Dia de los Muertos would be one day that we would celebrate on both channels. And then we would also have other cultural moments like Diwali, which is the Festival of Lights, where we can reach, Asian Indians or people of a certain religious orientation. But recognizing that we can celebrate these cultural moments, leverage influencers in ways to connect directly with people, along with some of the technological plays. But there's quite a few, rapidly evolving technologies, and we're always looking for new ways of doing that.
We also got a question looking at the different types of platforms where you're reaching consumers: audio, podcasts, print, and mail, direct mail, and all of these various outlets. For Toyota, what are you prioritizing right now? What are you finding are places that are ripe to find these audiences?
Yeah, I think as marketers, particularly with a brand like Toyota, we're trying everything. All media matters in that regard. And I think that it makes our jobs interesting because there's constantly new ways of reaching people. And, audio is a great example, whether it's radio or something newer like a podcast. They're both part of our mix. And, at Toyota, we have the benefit of having our national play, the media that, you know, sort of I lead from a national level, but we also work very closely with our dealer associations around the country. So we have these Toyota dealer associations that are set up around the country where we have to work very sort of cohesively and hand in hand in connecting with consumers. And I think one recent example is, you know, at the national level, our ad agency Burrell has worked with us on including audio media plans, the Ricky Smiley morning show, you know, Chubb Rock in the afternoon. For our sales events, we'll also align with Oprah's Super Soul Conversation podcast, and then looking at a more regional activation, working with our Chicago Toyota Dealer Association. They have a partnership with the Chicago Cubs, and Javi Baez, the second baseman. We've partnered with him to do some in-language audio, which allows us to resonate with the Spanish-speaking community and Hispanics in general. So these are some of the examples that we use as part of the overall media mix to connect not only at a national level, but at a regional level.
Andrea, we got a question looking at social media and influencer marketing and some of the tactics that will resonate with multicultural communities while also being sensitive to the digital divide.
Yeah, so definitely with the influencer marketing at Tumblr, we do have kind of a very specific point of view of how we focus with what we like to call creators. So they're skilled artists, and we kind of pull them in for their talent and their skills more so than for their social footprint. So we do have programs where we definitely kind of pull in and focus in on which are these multicultural creators that we can bring in, and back to the earlier question, really kind of connect on that inclusion aspect. And so while definitely it's key to continue on very focused multicultural marketing strategies, also ensuring that we're including them as part of, you know, general media plans. But yeah, it's definitely, so for influencers, it's definitely a key area to connect with the audience authentically, because it does bring in another layer of personalization. And then if we can layer in also understanding country of origin and, you know, the nationality that they represent, it brings in a nice message as well for our consumers. And it's a nice way to bring something that's social live with events and opportunities for people to meet the influencers as well.
And how are brands measuring success in multicultural marketing? That was another question from an audience member. Vinay, do you want to take that?
Yeah, there's, you know, I think a lot of different ways that we try to measure our success. The obvious one is looking at business success and how are we doing in terms of consumers sort of voting with their wallets, so to speak. And, you know, at Toyota, we're very proud and very, you know, protective of the fact that we're number one car company with respect to sales to African Americans. Same thing for Hispanics as well as for Asians. And these are metrics that we take very seriously. We don't take for granted, and therefore, as we're making decisions on allocating resources across the various media options that we have, we pay very close attention to using tools like multi-touch attribution, syndicated data like Nielsen, as well as many other measures of conversion to see which of these media investments are allowing us to connect with those consumers, again, in a very authentic and credible way, and what's actually resulting in conversion where people are saying, look, I like what you're doing. I see that you're sort of representing me in your communications. That's really, really a key aspect to how we approach our communications. And I think it's ever evolving. We don't have, you know, it down to a specific formula, but we're constantly looking at different ways of quantifying what's working and what's not. But again, we're trying to always relate it back to the business because ultimately that's a going concern.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrea, Vinay. Thank you for being on.
Thanks
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
So for our last set of questions, we are going to explore how to make authentic creative for multicultural audiences. And we are joined by Jari Blanco, Senior Manager of Multicultural Partnerships at Twitter, Ryan Robertson, Global Head of Brand Marketing at Popeyes, and Lewis Williams, Executive VP and Chief Creative Officer at Burrell Communications Group.
Hello, welcome.
Hello, hey everybody. Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Okay, so in our current environment, many brands are jumping into multicultural marketing, which is great. It can result in surface level changes for appearance only. That's a comment from one of our audience members. What are the smart moves that brands should take to authentically embrace multicultural communities, not just for appearances, but for truly embracing diversity and inclusion? Jari, do you want to start off?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm Jari. I am part of the Twitter community and team on the partnerships team under the marketing org. So I think for this, prior to coming to Twitter, I did diversity and inclusion work. And so to me, when I hear this question, the first thing that pops in my head is, who are you hiring? I think that a lot of times people say that there is a pipeline problem, which is not true because there's so many talented people. Literally just go on Twitter and you will find all of them. So I think very much first, like, who are you hiring? Because this is going to yield the best type of content. If you hire the people that know the culture and are in the culture that you're trying to tap into and create loyalty in, you'll be able to really create the best content. And, and that's because they're going to have the right context to the content. And as I say, content without context is a hot mess. So you really, really do need those people that get it, and not just at a surface level, but that like live it and experience it and are very tapped into it. And then lastly, I would say once you have the right people on the team, also being able to respond to things when you don't get them right. And a lot of times companies and brands don't know how to respond appropriately because they don't have the right people internally, not just thinking about it through a PR lens, but really knowing like what's happening in that community. Why did they react the way that they reacted? And so to me, really understanding that so that you're able to respond in an empathetic, authentic, and honest manner that has a clear direction as how you're going to fix whatever happened. That's really what's going to land the best. But if you come in being either ignoring it or being defensive or, coming in with excuses, that's when you're going to lose the consumers that you were trying to keep or that you were trying to gain, because that trust is going to be broken and it's going to take a really, it's going to take a long time to be able to come back to that.
We had multiple viewers asking for some examples of innovative and inclusive, quote unquote, out of the box ideas or tactics for connecting with multicultural communities. Ryan, do you have some examples you want to share or some thoughts on that?
Sure. So honestly, I think it's really about actions over words, right? What is your brand doing and how are you doing some actions that are meaningful to these communities? So an example that I have is when COVID hit, I think you saw many brands jump in to help frontline workers. But for Popeyes, we try to get really specific and connect with our community. And so everybody knows that Popeyes is a brand born in Louisiana, which is a place known for its blend of kind of diverse cultures, backgrounds, traditions. And so at that time, New Orleans was one of the most affected cities in the US by COVID-19. And so to support families in this community, Popeyes launched a NOLA Strong campaign, which consisted of like meals, apparel. 100% of the proceeds went to the Second Harvest Food Bank to feed over 1 million families in need. And we also provided donations and weekly Sunday meals to feed the frontline in NOLA to really support their mission to feed the New Orleans community. So I think that's an example of, hey, taking the moment, figuring out how the brand can be of utility in meaningful ways for the community and pushing that forward quickly. So that's an example that kind of comes to mind there.
Love that.
Similarly, talking about creating campaigns and innovation, we have a question of how do brands create relatable campaigns without then facing criticism for versioning assets? And one of our viewers pointed to the recent Joe Malone example. And, for anyone who's not familiar with it, the perfume candle brand, British brand, took a video created by Star Wars actor John Boyega. They took it, that he made it for them, and then they took it and reshot it for the Chinese market, removing him, removing any Black representation from that video. Louis, what are your thoughts on creating, relatable campaigns and then also versioning assets?
Well, I think, first of all, so often so many brands forget that we are people too. And all the things you do creatively, you just throw out the window because you're uncomfortable working with multicultural audiences, right? So there's no really special playbook here. It's just simply common sense. Whenever you've seen something like that, everyone scratches their head and say, how could that happen? And why did it happen? It just shows you that there's a lot of insensitivity when it comes to minorities, why minorities seem not to be valued, right? So it's really just one-on-one, right? I mean, these sort of things shouldn't happen in this day and time, but they consistently continue. So, I mean, how do you look out for that? I mean, you just look out for that. I mean, everybody's looking for a silver bullet. There's no silver bullet here. It's just simple common sense and empathy and understanding that would you like to be treated that way? It's just that simple.
It's a great point. I think that we're talking about, tactics and trying to put like some scientific spin on how to do this. And for, perhaps anyone you're trying to reach, thinking a little bit more about just how you yourself would want to be spoken to.
Yeah. And I want to add to that, because I think that ties back into the first question that you asked me. If you don't have the right people in the room that feel empowered and that have agency, and that feel like they're trusted and that their opinion matters, no one's going to call you out in that boardroom and be like, maybe we shouldn't do this because I see the iceberg. And I think that that's also something that's missed in those rooms. A lot of times people have the same background or have the same lived experience, or they're brought from the same schools, and that's where you're failing, because that's where it starts. If you don't have the right people in that room, again, that get it and that are empowered to speak up, you're going to continue to make these mistakes. And the community, specifically, I would say on Twitter, as someone that's on the platform as a user, feels like it's being like we're being trolled, and that is being done on purpose because it's happened so much. And so I think that that's so important to drive home for companies. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, absolutely. And how can brands refresh existing multicultural marketing campaigns to impact communities for good? Ryan, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think in terms of refreshing creative, I think that's an interesting notion, because I feel like I don't think you can really take previous creative off the shelf and just dust it off, right? It's not that easy. I don't think it's about repurposing. It's about really starting from where we are right now and building new, right? Because we're in a totally different landscape now. And I think brands need to look at the temper and tone of where we are in this moment right now and speak from this perspective, right? Brands should be speaking to the moment. I mean, branding is all about relevance, right? And so brands should be speaking to the moment. That may require rebuilding and relearning for teams, and that's okay. That's okay. Otherwise, I think brands run the risk of coming off tone deaf. So it's not about dusting off. It's about understanding this moment and creating from this moment and from the tone and temper where we stand now.
Agreed.
How do we create and authentically reach multicultural audiences, knowing their emotional sensitivities have been heightened during the current climate? Jari, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, again, going back to Twitter, listen more than you talk. I think that, Twitter is like a large self-created focus group that will literally tell you what the sentiment is within a community at any given moment. And that can really help you, as we say, read the room, right? And so that's really what's going to help you understand where people are and, really give you a moment to really think about like your strategy and how you're going to be able to like meet them in that moment in a way that, again, is very thoughtful and is very specific. And I'll give two examples. Watch parties on the platform are big. That's part of what the team that I'm on works on. And they tend to be successful. People really enjoy them. Sometimes people just do them on their own when they're like, when like Girlfriends came on Netflix, and it was a thing for weeks where people were just talking about which episode and which season they were on. So I'll give two examples for films. The first one was, when we first got into the pandemic and we were sent home, people really didn't know what was going on. People were scared. And then you could see that sentiment on the platform. And Jasmine, who leads Strong Black Lead over at Netflix, on her own tweeted about rewatching the homecoming for Beyonce's Homecoming on the platform, and people that very quickly caught on. And as part of my job and as someone that's on the platform, I saw that. And I was like, oh my God, we should totally partner and really like blow this out as big as possible. We were able to get back the emoji from Homecoming from the year prior. We got an event page for it and really helped eventize it. And people loved that. Like they really felt like, okay, it was like sitting in this very large living room with folks across the world and being able to experience an artist that really brings us joy and brings back like the spirit. And so that's an example of like reading the room and getting it right and like meeting the moment. And that happened within like 48 hours. And then I would say an example of like reading the room and avoiding a problematic situation. There was another really big film that was going to be released, and we were going to have a watch party for it. And it took like a month and a half to really plan it and put it together. And the week leading into it, George Floyd was murdered. And the timeline, once again, the sentiment showed that people were angry, and rightfully so, and that they didn't want to be distracted by something else, that they wanted to talk about this and be in the moment. And as a multicultural person on my team, seeing that, I was like, we should pull the plug on this or move this to another date, because if we do this now, and the film specifically was like a joyful kind of film, it's one, is going to get lost in the sauce because people are not going to pay attention, but two, it can really piss people off because it's like, hey, how are y'all not reading the room? So I think definitely being part of the community and having an personality for your brand, depending on what it is, to be able to connect, whether that's with MBA Twitter or that's with like beauty Twitter, but also like listen and really pay attention so that you could take those insights back into the room with your team and really be able to strategically choose, is this the right path for this week or for this project, and how do we pivot to meet the moment?
We actually received a couple of different versions of the next question. How best can a white person craft messaging that truly resonates with the multicultural audience? Louis, do you want to take that? You're laughing, nodding.
I just smile with that because I'm a Black man. Also, what do I do as a creative to create for non-Black people? So, I mean, you just that's an interesting question, but really look at that. So we can spend the next 20 minutes on that thought, right? So you have to, again, just understand that you are marketing to a culture. You're marketing, you have strategic, goals to reach, but you got to think about it for a second. For a person of color, we have to be bilingual, right? We have to see and observe what's happening, and we're forced to, in order to just operate in the world outside of our culture. If you are white, and let's be honest, you really do not have to engage yourself in other cultures. Mm-hmm. So that's very telling, right? So what you must do is open yourself up to other cultures, whether that's movies, whether that's shows, whether or not there's books that you need to read, right? And don't be a cultural tourist. So it's very easy to pluck with, you know, the Beyoncés and Jay-Z's of the world because they're entertainers, and, you know, and I listen to them when I ride my pedaling bike. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? But there's everyday Black people learning, and you need to learn those stories. And it just simply takes time and engagement, because all cultures are open to those who want to discover it.
I think I would even add a little bit to that too, Louis. Totally agree with everything you said. I would add that I think some brands get into the pattern of making very broad generalizations when it comes to diverse consumers, right? And like everybody else, multicultural consumers are not monolithic, right? There's no one size fits all approach. And I think that a lot of times not recognizing the smallest nuance can result in the greatest offense. And we've seen that time and time again with brands. And so I think brands need to really understand, to your point, Louis, brands need to really understand their multicultural audiences, right? Study them the way you do the rest of your target audience, and ensure that internal teams reflect your audience and consumers as well. Jadi, I think that was your point earlier, but you have to look at your internal teams and make sure they're reflective. And then I think the second piece that I would add is I think brands then take a step further and engage these consumers in conversations that matter, right? So yes, Black consumers are typically recognized as the purveyors of culture and cool, but they also like to be engaged in ways that matter, and not only as a gateway to cool, right? So I think brands need to find ways to champion these consumers and celebrate them, and not just benefit from them.
Yeah. And to whom do you turn to vet advertising for anti-racist sensitivities? Is it incorporated into legal review, or is it placed within another team? Ryan, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think it's a great question. Thanks for the question. I think I touched on it just a little bit with the last question when I spoke about like ensuring your teams are diverse and representative of your audience. I think that's the key, honestly. Because then they kind of understand, your team understands those nuances and watch outs and red flags as they come up. And it's important that the brand understands these nuances, and it doesn't fall solely on the legal team to catch them, right? I think additionally, brands or companies can turn to people within the community that kind of understand this audience. Leverage a consultant that has expertise in this area. There are a number of things that brands can do as well. But I think at the end of the day, if it's the legal department, if that's your catch-all for vetting sensitivities, then you need to go back and look at your team.
That's a fact.
Yeah. And Brian, I just want to add on to that is that it's interesting that brands forget they're experts. I mean, for Real Communications, we've been doing this for 5 decades, right? For some reason, brands forget they're experts. You know, because if something is wrong with you, sometimes you want to go to a specific surgeon, not surgeon, but a specific doctor, right? So there are experts out there. So just make sure you tap the experts, as opposed to assuming that we all have to learn this from square one. That is not the case. Plenty of experts out there.
Yeah. This next question is from another audience member. As the Hispanic population becomes increasingly acculturated, how important is language in storytelling? Shari, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Language is important, but I think that specifically in the US, sometimes region is a little more important than language. You know, for example, myself, I am Dominican. I was born on the island. I moved to Venezuela as a kid, and then I moved to New York. And so being from New York and being Dominican, there's like very specific language that I'm a part of and that I understand. But someone that might be Caribbean and happen to grow up in Chicago or in LA or Texas, they're gonna have different access to a different lexicon. So I think a lot of times language is important if you're trying to be specific and you're trying to reach a specific audience and a specific demographic. But otherwise, I think region is really, really important, because you could be third generation Mexican American and again raised in LA or raised in Texas, and depending on where your family's from within Mexico, there's again a different lexicon to tap into. So I would say region is really important, and yes to language. A lot of times what I see that has worked the best is when people are using Spanglish, because they're able to like kind of tap into that bicultural community that I'm a part of, honestly, that feels a little more authentic because not everybody's going to speak Spanish. And so you might miss a whole group of people with that. Not everybody's going to speak fluent English. So you're going to miss a whole group with that. So again, I think it really just depends on like who you are trying to reach within the Hispanic audience, what the age group is. And then, going back to what Louis said earlier, like there isn't a silver bullet. A lot of times people just want something that's very evergreen and they miss the mark. And so it's like, how do you create content that has a sentiment that's going to drive people to buy the thing that you want them to, or that they're going to watch the thing you want them to, but that is a little more specific to their region and their background.
A friend of mine said to me, he said, Louis, in English, I understand, but in Spanish, I feel. And when he said that, oh, I got it. I got it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, yeah. I love that. I agree.
You can snaps on that one.
I think we should end there because that was a great way to end this. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being on and taking the time.
Thank you for having us. This was great.
Great conversation.
All right, cool.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you to all of the panelists who really took the time today to thoughtfully, passionately answer these questions. We very much appreciate it. Thank you to those of you watching at home. Those of you who sent in questions, please keep them coming. Keep an eye on adage.com/events for more information on our town halls for 2021. And of course, thank you to Lindsay for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, and a special thank you to our Ad Age crew, Alfred Mascaroni, Anna Sakula, Max Sternlicht, and Elise Liffring for making this live stream happen. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.